Hi folks, and welcome to the UNS-1 Flight Management System tutorial video for the JustFlight professional series of aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Just like the real UNS-1, our version was designed to be fitted to a variety of aircraft, with it first being featured in our 146 Professional before then being added to some of our other aircraft. This tutorial flight will cover the UNS-1 Operations in the 146 Professional in Microsoft Flight Simulator. However, the functions of the UNS-1 will largely be the same for each aircraft type it features in, with the exceptions of the aircraft name on some of the pages, some performance pages, and the default weights and fuel figures used. The operation of the autopilot will also be slightly different depending on the aircraft type. This tutorial will cover the procedures required in order to complete a flight with the UNS-1, but it will not deep dive into each of the UNS-1's features in full detail. For full information on the UNS-1, please have a read of our UNS-1 Operations Manual, which we will link in the description box below. Our route today for this tutorial flight is Auckland International Airport on the North Island of New Zealand to Christchurch Airport on the South Island of New Zealand. This 400-mile route is not only the perfect length for this tutorial flight, but also provides a good variety of nav aids and airways that we will have to use in the UNS-1. Loading into the aircraft, we have the aircraft set up in a turnaround state with the UNS-1 powered off. Before we power on the UNS-1, we want to briefly cover some of the terminology that we will use throughout this tutorial. The keys down the far left and right sides of the unit are function keys. They are labelled with the name of the page that will be opened when they are pressed. The keys that are closer to the screen are the select keys. In particular, the keys on the left side of the screen are called the left select keys, or LSK, and the keys on the right side are right select keys, or RSK. The keys are also given numbers from 1 to 5 from top to bottom, so the top left key is LSK1 and the bottom right key is RSK5. Finally, the alphanumeric keypad at the bottom of the unit is used to input letters and numbers. With those formalities out of the way, we can now turn on the UNS-1 by pressing the power dim key. Once pressed, the unit will then run through a self-test procedure, and once the self-test is complete, the first page shown will be the initialization page, or init page. We need to check that all the data listed on this page is correct before pressing LSK5 or the enter key to accept. With the initialization complete, we can now input the flight plan for today's flight on the flight plan page. Press the FPL function key to open the flight plan page. We can now input the flight plan in one of two ways, either by importing the flight plan by pressing RSK3 next to the copy route text, then inputting the reference number for the desired flight plan and then pressing enter. The flight plans on this page will all be stored locally on your PC in a .rte format. The file directory for these files is included in the UNS-1 Operations Manual. For this tutorial flight though, we want to walk through how to input the flight plan manually, so we can press the menu button and then delete the flight plan to start afresh. With an empty flight plan page, ensure the first empty field is highlighted, and then we can enter our departure airport for today, which is November Zulu Alpha Alpha. Once this has been inputted, we can press the enter key and a page will pop up showing the name and coordinates of the airport you are attempting to enter. Ensure the name and coordinates are correct before pressing LSK5 or the enter key again to add the airport to the flight plan. You will now be returned to the flight plan page, and the departure airport will now be inserted at the top field of the flight plan. We can now begin inputting the waypoints on our flight plan. We'll start by inputting the SID, or Standard Instrument Departure, that is listed on our flight plan, which today is the Lima 1 Papa. So ensuring that we are on the flight plan page, we can press the menu key and then press LSK4 to open the departure menu. The departure menu will open with the runway field already highlighted, and a list of available runways will be displayed on the left side of the display. We will be departing from runway 23 left today, which has a reference number of 2. So using the alphanumeric keypad, type 2 in the runway field and then press enter. The highlighted field will then automatically move down to the SID field, and a list of available SIDs for that runway will be displayed. We will be flying the Lever 1 Papa SID, which has a reference number of 6, so we can input the reference number into the SID field and then press enter. Again, the highlighted field will then automatically move down to the transition field, and a list of available transition points for that SID will be displayed. As call is the first waypoint in our flight plan and the last waypoint on the SID, this will be our transition point, so we can input the reference number into the transition field and press enter. The SID has now been inputted in the flight plan, and this can be viewed by returning to the flight plan page, either by pressing the flight plan function key or by pressing RSK5. We can view the entirety of the SID by pressing the previous and next keys. We will follow a similar procedure to this later in the flight when we enter the arrival procedures, but for now we'll focus on adding the remainder of the waypoints in our flight plan. Now, we could enter each waypoint manually, but as our flight plan includes Airways, we can instead build our flight plan with a mixture of waypoints and Airways to speed up the process. To enter an airway from the call waypoint, ensure the next empty field in the flight plan is highlighted and then press the list function key. On the list page, press RSK2 to open the Airways list, where all the airways that intersect the call waypoint are shown. As per our flight plan, we want to fly from call on the Hotel 384 airway to November Papa. Therefore, we need to input the reference number for the Hotel 384 airway with the keypad and then press enter. We will then see a list of all the waypoints on the Hotel 384 airway, and as we will be flying on this airway as far as November Papa, we can select the November Papa waypoint by inputting its reference number and then pressing enter. Returning to the flight plan page, all of the waypoints between call and November Papa on the Hotel 384 airway will now be inserted into the flight plan. In this instance, November Papa was the next waypoint following call on the Hotel 384 airway, so only the November Papa waypoint has been inserted. The number of waypoints added in this process will vary depending on how many waypoints are on the selected airway. We can now repeat this process for the next airway on our flight plan. Highlight the next empty field on the flight plan page, and then press the list function key and then RSK2 to open the airways list. Input the reference number for the Hotel 252 airway and press enter. Then input the reference number for the November Sierra waypoint and press enter. Returning to the flight plan page, we can see that significantly more waypoints have been added to the flight plan this time due to the larger distance that we will be travelling on the Hotel 252 airway. This shows why this method of flight plan entry is the most efficient, as adding each of those waypoints to the flight plan manually will be much more time consuming, whereas this method lets you add all of these waypoints by simply selecting an airway and a start and an end point. We can repeat this process once more by adding the required waypoints on the Yankee 288 airway between November Sierra and Peaks. Once all the waypoints in the flight plan have been inserted, input the destination airport, which is November Zulu Charlie Hotel, as the last entry in the flight plan, and then press enter. Now that all the waypoints have been entered, it's good practice to double check that the flight plan matches our planned route, and if it doesn't, we can delete or edit any of the waypoints that are not correct. For this tutorial flight, all the distances between the waypoints look good, and all the waypoints match up with our flight plan, so it looks like we're all good. Just to note at this point that we haven't yet inputted our arrival procedure, and that is intentional, as typically we wouldn't be sure of what runway is in use at Christchurch until we are closer to the destination airport. So to keep this tutorial realistic and to spread the workload out throughout the tutorial flight, we'll save setting up the arrival procedure until later on in the flight. With the flight plan entered, we can now move to the fuel page by pressing the fuel function key. On the fuel page, ensure that the number of passengers in the PAX field matches up with the passenger numbers on the EFB, and then press enter. If they do not match, press LSK2, input the correct number into the highlighted field and then press enter. The cargo field, where the weight of the cargo can be inputted, will then be highlighted automatically. Ensure that the cargo weight matches up with the weight on the EFB and then press enter. If it's not correctly set, input the correct value and press enter. The fuel on board field, which is where the weight of the fuel can be inputted, will then be highlighted automatically. The field should be automatically synchronized with the current fuel level in the aircraft, so only a cross-check is required. Pressing enter will confirm the current figure. The UNS-1 is now set up for departure. Pressing the nav function key will confirm that the to waypoint, which is the waypoint the aircraft is now going to try and fly to, is an altitude restriction related to the SID. This is correct, as the altitude restriction is positioned just after the end of the runway, and the next waypoint is the first waypoint on the SID, URSIP. On departure, the aircraft will begin to follow the UNS-1's lateral navigation as long as the correct LNAV or RNAV modes are configured on the aircraft's autopilot panel. So in terms of the 146, we need to ensure that the HSI selector switch is set to RNAV and that LNAV is armed on the autopilot panel. It's also an important point to remember here that the UNS-1 does not provide vertical navigation to the autopilot, so vertical navigation has to be accomplished using the aircraft's standard vertical modes. So in the case of the 146, you will still need to use your indicated airspeed, vertical speed or sync modes. So with the UNS-1 now set up for our departure, we can now skip forward to the climb portion of the flight and cover some of the functions of the UNS-1 during the climb. So we are currently climbing on the SID, and we can monitor the flight plan and nav pages on the UNS-1 to confirm that the aircraft is tracking the correct waypoints. Once a waypoint has been overflown, the next waypoint will become active automatically. The active waypoint always displays in magenta on the UNS-1. If air traffic control were to clear us to perform a shortcut of our route or to fly direct to a certain waypoint, we can achieve this by pressing the DTO function key and then inputting the reference number of the waypoint we have been cleared direct to. Once the reference number has been inputted, pressing the enter key will confirm this and will turn the selected waypoint magenta, and the aircraft will then fly directly to the new active waypoint. Skipping ahead again to the cruise portion of the flight, we can continue to monitor the various pages on the UNS-1 and confirm correct lateral navigation. On the nav page, we can see an overview of our position on the flight plan, as well as viewing information regarding our current position, such as the current wind conditions and how this affects our ground speed and flight path offset. On the performance page, we can see the aircraft's current fuel situation, including the time at which we are currently estimated to arrive at our destination and the amount of fuel we expect to have remaining once we land. If, for instance, we have a very strong headwind, we could be burning more fuel than expected, and we will be able to tell from this page if we could still make it to the destination with a safe amount of fuel remaining. As we are only flying a short route a day with full fuel tanks, this shouldn't be an issue. Continuing on this performance page, pressing the menu key followed by LSK5 will open the ETP PNR page. This page shows us the direct distance to our departure and destination airports, as well as the estimated time it would take to fly there and the amount of fuel remaining we would have upon landing. In one of these empty fields, we can enter Wellington Airport, November Zulu Whiskey November. Wellington Airport is located on the southern coast of New Zealand's North Island, so it will be a good choice of an alternate airport if we suddenly had to divert. With the time, distance and fuel indicated on this page, we could quickly plan our top of descent and know far in advance if we were going to be under or over our maximum landing weight. As we start to head across the Cook Strait and the New Zealand South Island comes into view, we can start setting up our arrival procedure. With only light winds out of the west in Christchurch, we will be flying the Peak 8 Bravo Star, or standard arrival route, onto the ILS approach for runway 20. We can access the arrival page by pressing the flight plan function key, followed by the menu key, and then RSK4 to open the arrival page. The arrival page will open with the runway field highlighted and a list of available runways will be displayed. As we will be arriving on runway 20, we can input the reference number in the runway field and then press enter. The field highlighted will then move down to the star field and a list of available stars for that runway will be displayed. We will be flying the Peak 8 Bravo Star, so press next to scroll through the pages until we find the correct star. Then input the reference number into the star field and then press enter. The field highlighted will then move down to the approach field and a list of available approaches for the selected runway will be displayed. As we will be flying the ILS for runway 20, we can input the reference number for the ILS approach into the approach field and then press enter. The field highlighted will then move across to the transition field and a list of available transition points for the approach will be displayed. We will be flying the Odyssey transition, which is the waypoint at the end of the star and the beginning of the ILS approach, so we can input the reference number for Odyssey in the transition field and then press enter. The arrival procedure has now been inputted into the flight plan and can be viewed by pressing RSK5 or the flight plan function key to return to the flight plan page. We can press the previous and next keys to cycle through the flight plan. As always, it's good practice to double check that the flight plan matches our planned route, and we can delete or edit any waypoints that are incorrect. We can now begin to plan our descent, and although the UNS-1 is simulated to be fitted to an aircraft without a VNAV autopilot mode, like the 146, the VNAV page can still be used to determine an accurate top of descent point and descent path. Pressing the VNAV function key will open the Path VNAV page. The page is currently in its inactive state and displays the waypoints on the approach as well as their respective altitude constraints. The first altitude constraint on the approach is at peaks, where we need to be above 11,000 feet when we pass overhead, so this will be the initial altitude we descend to. We can now input the target vertical speed for our descent by pressing RSK1 and then inputting the desired figure. For this flight in the 146, we'll input 2000 feet per minute as our target vertical speed, and then we can press enter. The Path VNAV page now enters cruise mode, and a new line of data indicating the distance still to fly until the top of descent will appear at the top of the page. Underneath this line, the required vertical speed from the aircraft's current position to the first altitude restriction is displayed. This is a useful tool during the descent as it provides a visual reference as to how high or low the aircraft is compared to the target vertical speed. In order to achieve a smooth on-target descent, the aircraft's vertical speed should match the target vertical speed shown here throughout the descent. When the distance to top of descent reaches 0 nautical miles, the page now enters descent mode and will provide vertical speed guidance. As we have entered a target vertical speed of 2000 feet per minute, our aim is to keep this indicator at 2000 feet per minute throughout the entire descent. If the indicator starts to indicate 1700 feet per minute, that means we are too low with respect to the target descent path, and we need to reduce our descent rate to 1700 feet per minute in order to reach our first altitude restriction at the correct altitude. If the indicator starts to indicate 2300 feet per minute, that means we are too high with respect to the target descent path, and we need to increase our descent rate to 2300 feet per minute in order to still reach our first altitude restriction at the correct altitude. As we pass over the peaks waypoint, the to waypoint on the Path VNAV page will automatically change to the next waypoint with an altitude restriction. So in this instance, that is Blunt, which we have to cross above 7,000 feet. As we descend, the path VAV page will continue to show and update the required vertical speed for the remainder of the descent, so it's a useful tool to monitor. During the approach, we can continue to monitor the nav, flight plan and VNAV pages to keep track of our progress. If the aircraft has multiple UNS-1s fitted, it can be useful to have each UNS-1 displaying a different screen during these high workload situations. As the aircraft turns onto the final approach course for runway 20, it's important to remember that the UNS-1 does not have any command over the aircraft's vertical navigation. In order for the aircraft to intercept and track the ILS localizer and glide slope, the correct course and frequency must be tuned into the aircraft's nav radios. The ILS for runway 20 at Christchurch uses a course of 196 degrees and a frequency of 110.30 MHz. Once within intercept range of the localizer and glide slope, we can disengage the aircraft's LNAV and VNAV capability and engage the aircraft's traditional autopilot approach modes.
100. Minimums. 50, 40, 30, 20, 10.
After a successful landing and parking at the gate, we can now shut down the aircraft and power off the UNS-1. As we no longer need the flight plan loaded in the UNS-1, we can delete it by opening the flight plan page, pressing the menu key and then pressing LSK5 twice. We can then switch off all UNS-1 units in the cockpit by pressing the power dim function key followed by RSK5. And with that wraps up the tutorial flight for the UNS-1 fitted in the JustFlight professional series of aircraft in Microsoft Flight Simulator. As we mentioned at the start of this video, this tutorial covers the procedures required to get from A to B with the UNS-1. It doesn't cover each of the UNS-1's many features in depth. If you'd like to read more about the UNS-1's features, you can download our in-depth PDF manual, which can be downloaded via the link in the description box below. If you found this video useful, it would be very much appreciated if you could leave the video a like, a comment, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to keep fully up to date on all of our products that we have in development, you can do so by visiting the in development page on justflight.com.